We've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years now, and the most listened to episodes are always the ones talking about career and certifications in Treasury. So we decided to partner up with the AFP, the Association for Financial Professionals, so we can offer you a $100 discount code on all of the AFP's products. This includes, of course, the CTP, the Certified Treasury Professional, which is hands down the most renowned and recognized certification in Treasury out there. And of course, the access to the CTP exam prep platform as well. Check the link in the description to access to those discount codes and take your career to the next level. Welcome to the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. In today's episode, we discuss Treasury Outsourcing with Justin Callaghan from FTI Treasury. Justin has nearly 30 years of experience of working in the corporate treasury world. For the last 17 years, Justin has been working with FTI Treasury, overseeing the provision of treasury outsourcing services to a wide range of multinational organizations. FTI Treasury is a Dublin-based specialist treasury company focused on providing treasury outsourcing solutions to multinational companies. In the episode of today, expect to learn what is treasury outsourcing and its primary objectives, which treasury functions are commonly outsourced and why, what is the typical company's profile that seeks to outsource treasury functions, how do companies ensure control and oversight when outsourcing treasury tasks, and, like always, much more. Treasury outsourcing, when done right, has interesting intersections with treasury consulting, which made for a very interesting conversation with Justin, who has a tremendous amount of knowledge in the field and managed to answer very well some of our toughest questions. We hope you will enjoy the episode. If that is the case, and when you're thinking about how you found our podcast, chances are that it was through word of mouth, social media, or a recommendation from your favorite podcast platform. And this is our only request to you. The best way you can support the podcast is to head to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Corporate Treasury 101. That will mean the world to us and help more people learn about treasury.
Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Great to have you on Corporate Treasury 101.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to this chat, guys. It's great to see and be talking to you in person. I've looked at all your other previous podcasts and they're very interesting. It's great to see Corporate Treasury being pushed to the forefront in a kind of interesting and new and innovative way. So well done, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Very good. So you're going to talk with us about Treasury Outsourcing. Can you tell us what Treasury Outsourcing is, please?
Right. So I hope you weren't hoping for a kind of a one-line answer to that, guys.
Not at all.
Treasury outsourcing has really changed a lot over the years. I've been involved in this business in one way or another for the guts of 30 years. And the evolution of it has been really interesting. So, like in its simplest form, Treasury outsourcing, as with any outsourcing, is kind of the outsourcing of a specific treasury process to a third party for operational management. That's very simple. That's what you'd expect, I guess, with outsourcing. However, the view on what the sort of processes might be and how to derive the best results from Treasury outsourcing has changed kind of dramatically since the concept was first knocked around. So, like when I look at this, I sort of look at the evolution of Treasury outsourcing over kind of three kind of pretty distinct phases, even though they all kind of merge into each other. And it's probably over the last maybe 25 to 30 years that these stages have sort of developed. So initially, when the concept of Treasury outsourcing kind of became popular and was starting to be discussed, particularly in the corporate environment, it was probably in around the mid-1990s. And the main discussion back then was about the kind of full outsourcing of a corporate treasury function. So in theory, the concept was that a CFO would almost abdicate responsibility for treasury activities to a third party. That's a big decision, big risk, and a brave man. I remember at that time I was working for a FTSE 100 multinational in the kind of communication sector, and it was I would say it had a mid-size corporate treasury team, about maybe 10 to 15 people. And I remember we were all gathered together in a room in London to discuss the strategic future of the Treasury function of that organisation. And front and central at that stage on that agenda was the concept of outsourcing, outsourcing the Treasury. And we did a very deep dive into all of the things that a Treasury function does. And it quickly became very apparent that about 60% of them are not outsourceable. And in many ways they are the ones that maybe take less time but take much more strategic vision and much more business alignment that can't be outsourced. So there are certain things that just aren't suitable. And if you think about it, simple things like relationship management with funders, understanding the internal culture of the organisation, managing some internal relationships in terms of tax, corporate acquisitions, etc., etc. They're not really things that lend themselves to the outsource world. So within that context, we as a group then drew the conclusion that this concept of full Treasury outsourcing, having no Treasury function and outsourcing the whole thing, probably isn't really a runner for that organisation. That and the fact, of course, that we would have all lost our jobs had we decided that, made us believe that it wasn't the right decision.
It's a bit of a conflict that you were making the decision.
Exactly. But in fairness, like that concept of the full outsourcing, it actually didn't get legs really. It didn't run at all, and it's for those particular reasons that I've outlined. That it very quickly fell by the wayside. It was kind of a buzzword, and I'm sure there was a CT 101 that was on fax or telex or something back then that had similar discussions, and they probably reached that conclusion as well. Look, that is not a format that's going to kind of work. So if I think about the next phase then, which is probably from the kind of the late 90s into the early 2000s, that concept of outsourcing was actually a very successful one from both a corporate and an outsourced service provider perspective. And it centered mainly on the outsourcing of Treasury activities within tax-driven structures. So the classic examples would be the kind of Lux based structure, or the Irish based Treasury Centre structure, and those sorts of tax based financial company structures. Generally, they were a particular vehicle, an SPV in many cases, which had some form of capital and debt hybrid funding, accompanied with kind of an intercompany loan portfolio parked within them, and that's a nice ring-fenced set of Treasury activities that lends itself nicely to be outsourced. The other obvious thing with any tax structure is that it is generally required to be managed, maintained, and operated within the jurisdiction of tax benefit. So there was a lot of activity in that space whereby a multinational company would establish a financial company to provide specific Treasury related, generally intercompany lending style activities. And those were very popularly outsourced, particularly into Ireland, into Dublin, which became sort of the centre of Treasury outsourcing throughout the kind of late 90s and the 2000s.
What's SPV?
Sorry, special purpose vehicle. But in general, it is a company that is set up specifically to undertake a limited range of activities. So, to give you a simple example, is if you establish a company and let's say you put in 50 million in capital and you leverage 200 million in debt into a specific singular finance company, and then you use those funds to lend intercompany around your group, then you'll find that all the interest flow is coming into that entity that you've established on an intercompany basis. And obviously there will, in many cases, be a tax deduction for that at local source. And then you will be taxed at a lower rate, perhaps, where you're established. So that was the the kind of model that would have been in place back then. Now, it should be said that with BEPS and ATAD3 and all these other advances in tax legislation, that those sort of tax structures are gone now, right? So it's not really a model that is at the forefront. But at the time, it was very popular, and it was very popular to outsource those particular sort of types of arrangements. So if you think about it now, what you've got is a bundle of service providers that have built up a skill set in particular types of treasury activities, right? Generally speaking, kind of intercompany style activities, managing loan portfolios, managing debt, stuff like that, right? And it is a body of work that sort of kind of is very distinct and easily done on an outsourced basis because it can be ring fenced and you can put parameters around it, and you can define sort of how that should be managed. So then we reach kind of late 2000s, early teenies, I suppose, and the treasury outsourcing market kind of matured, and a number of things happened. If you think about what we discussed there previously in terms of those sort of tax-based structures, they are treasury activities, but they're what I'd refer to as not very active treasury activities. So in other words, you might get a bunch of debt and capital in, and then you might lend it out on an intercompany basis. But then it just sits there, right? It's like core lending. You're not doing cash and liquidity management. You're not managing FX. You're not doing any of those sort of daily chores. So whilst you've got an infrastructure in place that can do a lot, it's actually quite static in its nature. So then, as the treasury outsourcing market matured, kind of a number of key things happened. Firstly, the kind of service providers who were relying solely on the tax structures, they, to be honest, very often didn't have the relevant corporate treasury skills to provide the kind of level of add value service expected from clients. And this meant that a lot of them exited the market, to be honest, particularly the international banks, who would have been big players in this market, particularly around those tax structures. And they found that the outsourcing model, which is effectively a professional services model, didn't sit well with the kind of traditional capital-driven business model of the banks. So a lot of those banks exited this market, which left a lot of clients, to be honest, looking for a home. So it kind of left a gap for service providers such as us, FTI Treasury, who had corporate treasury outsourcing as our core business, right? Like that's all that we do from a business perspective, whereas the banks were kind of using it as a kind of an add-on service. The other thing that happened at this time, which is probably more relevant and people will be able to kind of probably visualize a little bit easier, is that the ability for outsourced service providers to provide kind of a wider range of value-added services exploded, really due to both advances in technology and kind of general advances in the treasury world. That, coupled with the kind of the CFO, CEO, board expectations of what a treasury function should do, that broadened rapidly, and it started including things like group-wide cash reporting, forecasting, an element of AP and AR management, global cash management. And if you think about it, these are all processes that kind of outsourced service providers were somewhat used to managing in the tax-based structures, but they could now leverage on them to provide kind of true value-added services to clients on a global basis. So that evolution brought us to the kind of the third phase, and that's kind of where we are now, to be honest. So now as the kind of market has fully matured, we tend to define treasury outsourcing as kind of the outsourcing of global processes, which add value to both business processes, so how things are done, but also the bottom line of an organization. And I think it's important that more often than not, these processes are business rather than tax driven and provided using hosting technology, which can be rolled out on a global basis, which means actually the location of the treasury balance sheet is kind of almost irrelevant from the outsourcing perspective. From our perspective, it's the end-to-end delivery of a particular treasury process that's important, and where the sort of P&L element of that or the balance sheet element of that sits in the world is irrelevant. And as I said, that's all facilitated by this kind of concept of the cloud, hosted technology, and obviously increased ability in terms of global banking and liquidity structures and the likes. It's a bit of a long answer to a short question, gents.
Yeah.
It's not a one sentence answer, that's for sure.
So at least it wasn't treasury outsourcing when you outsource treasury functions. Stop. That would be the worst. Long story. So let me hear if I get that right then, because just to summarize a little bit, right? So what you're saying is that there was this development over the 3 waves of treasury outsourcing, right? In the start, there wasn't really a treasury outsourcing thing. People would look at it, but they really felt like they couldn't because the way treasury was as an operation, the infrastructure's behind it and whatnot. In the second phase, it was being offered thanks to tax incentives in locations such as Dublin and Ireland, as general, let's say. But the banks were the ones that were doing it. They eventually realized they don't want to do it anymore. And now we're in this third wave where we have these third-party providers specialized, such as FTI, in treasury outsourcing activities. That's correct. TLDR. Is that
probably
the summary?
One of the key ones, I'm just on that third phase, is that the sorts of processes that are outsourced now, and we'll discuss some of them in a moment, but importantly, they are very active. So they're the daily processes that need to be done by any treasury department to ensure the smooth running of the business. So they're not these kind of passive structural style processes. They're getting your hands dirty. They're the muck and bullet end of treasury.
So what's the difference between a treasury outsource company and a service center? One of our first guests that we had on the show was Bart Hendricks, who was talking about service centers specifically. And he was also saying that it's the repetitive tasks that you can outsource to perhaps a country with the lower average wage, where you can perhaps get some cost savings from there, and the repetitive tasks, menial tasks that perhaps you don't want. Dublin is not that.
No, it's not. And it's
Dublin is a very expensive place.
Quite the contrary.
well, no, that is a good question, and we'd probably come to that further on in this conversation. But you're right. So a shared services centre tends to have highly replicatable tasks, which are administrative in nature. And there is some skill set obviously required, particularly around the accounting elements and the likes. But very often, like, the bulk of the work done in a shared service centre is being placed there purely for economic purposes. Treasury outsource and indeed shared services centre, as you're well aware, can be either kind of internal or third party. So it's not sort of it's not purely a kind of a third party play, and we would probably suggest that often the ones that we deal with that are working best are probably internal ones, just given that the nature of flows and the likes, it is good to have that consistency and continuity of the team. Treasury outsourcing is a little bit different in that we're a little bit higher up the food chain, to be completely honest. So our team here will be a team of treasury professionals with a lot of corporate treasury experience. We'd have bank traders. We'd have a whole range of treasury accountants and the likes. So the expectation here is that we are able to undertake very well-defined processes, but we're also able to have an advisory input or a strategic input into those processes. And all of that is done within a very tightly defined risk framework that we would agree with clients, because obviously you don't want some guy going off and thinking he's Gordon Gekko or whatever and trading away. So we have very well-defined
shorting the housing market.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah. So we actually spend a lot of time creating that framework up front, and we have, we obviously have our internal framework. We're an SSAE, SOC 1 tested environment. We're a regulated entity. So we would have lots of sort of internal controls. But then at the end of the day, you also need to have a reflective risk appetite of your clients, right? So and that's something that's done on an individual basis, client by client. And I guess where we can help and slot in, or any service provider can help and slot in, is that we're lucky enough to see this across a whole range of clients, so we can make suggestions, and then our clients can kind of pick and choose what they feel is the best suited to their internal culture. But to answer your question straight, we would be providing a little more from a knowledge well perspective probably than a shared services centre. And that flows both in terms of helping people with, day-to-day activities, and also the longer-term sort of strategic aspects of banking relationships, banking structures, and stuff like that.
So, can you break down those treasury activities and tasks that would perhaps go towards a treasury outsource
Sure. Yeah.
company and versus service centers? What are those treasury tasks? So APAR, you said, for example. I've heard that in both now. So is it elements of AP and AR that you're managing versus a service center?
Yeah, so
is it kind of
so,
is that an overlap?
So we,
is it Venn diagram?
yeah, no, that's a fair question. And maybe just to address that one directly before we talk about other. So we look at treasury processes. We are not a shared services provider. So we're not processing invoices or, allocating
exactly
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So where we would cross over with AP and AR is in terms of working capital management. So ensuring sufficient liquidity, ensuring sufficient currency, in many cases managing a forecasting element, which obviously requires ERP integration and AP and AR information integration. So it's more at the high level oversight, funding, liquidity level where we would look at AP and AR. But I suppose at the end of the day, that is the oil within the business, right? The processing of the invoices and the likes, it needs to be done, obviously.
100%.
The result of that is a treasury result. It's a liquidity risk, it's a currency risk, in some cases it's a credit risk. And the other space that we would play in terms of helping people is defining the best way to meet, for instance, your AP requirements. So, we'd often come across clients where, by no fault of their own or by accident, they're processing what should be sort of ACH low value payments via wire. It's costing a fortune, so we'd help them redesign that process within their ERP system and stuff.
Justin, that sounds pretty much like consulting work. It's not. It's like it's more okay. We have the knowledge. Yeah. I mean, which is not a bad thing. Just to be clear, coming from a consulting background, but it's more like bringing knowledge from what you've seen with other clients and servicing other clients into a new company, rather than just taking a kind of task that is done daily or monthly
is an element,
and defining the strategy.
Yeah, no, it's a fair comment. There is an element of that, right? And we do have a kind of a consulting arm to our business as well. But I wouldn't. That's the add value element, perhaps, right? Our bread and butter, which I'll talk you through in a minute, is doing stuff. We get our it's
ouch.
Ouch.
The consultants.
Consultants tell you stuff. We do stuff.
Oh, come on.
Clipping that.
There is
posting that everywhere.
There is some truth in that. Okay, clear. But so let's maybe keep on breaking down the basics so we properly understand treasury outsourcing, and then definitely let's get into the business model, what you bring to the
Yeah.
The first thing you mentioned when we asked what are the typical tasks or typical function of treasury that you would outsource, that a company would outsource, you said working capital management. And to throw some buzzwords out there, cash is king, cash is the lifeblood of the company, cash is whatever, you name it. Why would a company choose to outsource part of its treasury function, if not all its treasury function, beyond the tax incentive, which was the main reason initially, and as you mentioned at the beginning of this episode? Why would somebody now say, okay, my cash management will be outsourced now?
Yeah. So maybe if we take a step back a little bit, right? And because I'll answer that question by going backwards, if you don't mind.
Perfect. Go for it.
Generally speaking, when we look at our clients, they fall into two sort of business models for outsourcing. Okay. The first is probably what you've just referred to there, Guillaume. It's the concept of sort of working capital management in general. Okay, generally speaking, our clients that outsource to us we would define that as a range of services that would sit within an in-house bank. Okay, now when we talk about an in-house bank, we're talking about the treasury elements of an in-house bank. Not necessarily, it might become POBO, COBO, but not necessarily that sort of concept. That's more down, as we mentioned, in the kind of shared services sort of element. So what do we generally see housed in an in-house bank and outsourced to us? Well, firstly is what you mentioned there. It's just daily cash and liquidity management. Okay, now that how long is a piece of string on that, right? That could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But for us, it is really, it's the management of banking structures. So the management of daily flows across zero balancing structures, the management of notional pools, the management of multi-currency notional pools, the management of multi-bank sweeps. So the whole sort of gamut of those banking structures that is really providing the the working capital, the liquidity, the cash oil into the business at an operational level. So you were getting down and dirty.
But so just to follow up on that, Justin, because that's super interesting. You need to be really hands-on what the company is up to, because I mean it's one thing to manage the cash and make sure all the ZBAs are up to date and that the notional pooling money is used internally to repay debt and like invest overnight and so on. But what if a big payment needs to comes up, or what if a project needs to be funded, or what if there is anything happening in the company that needs the actual money? You need to be very much involved in this kind of discussion as well.
Correct.
Or is my understanding? Okay.
So we are absolutely involved, and that is where, when we talk about our kind of relationships with clients, like we are. That's another probably fundamental difference between how we operate and how, for instance, shared services would operate. Our clients will readily tell us that we're basically just part of their team, right? So we have SLAs, okay? We have agreed tasks, we have all that sort of stuff for clients, obviously, right? But we are just part of their team at the end of the day. So we participate in team meetings, we have the team discussions, we know what's going on in the company, etc., etc. And in addition to that, we bring structure to the sorts of things that you've just discussed. So I mentioned that one of the things we do is daily cash and liquidity management, managing all those flows and the likes. And you can imagine all of the administration, right, that goes behind that, because there's intercompany loans to be managed, there's intercompany statements, bank recs. So we do all that stuff. So it's easy to say we manage cash pools and make it sound like it's a 5-minute job in the morning, but there's a little bit more to it, as you're well aware. One of the other things we do, and which has become more and more popular, and it's to do with some of the buzzwords that you threw around there, like cash is king, cash visibility, etc., is we facilitate and provide services in the area of cash visibility and forecasting. So for instance, and when these processes are put together in an in-house bank, right? They kind of all they're organic, and so you're asking these questions. You need to do this and you need to do that. When in fact, you're quite right. And sort of by going through these processes, we have seen what we need to do and kind of package together a range of different sort of modules or services in order to meet what we believe are our clients' requirements. So if you think of some of the other things, right? So we do daily cash and liquidity management, right? We would also manage cash visibility and forecasting, which in itself facilitates, right, the daily cash management. We would manage all of the intercompany loans, so core loans and portfolios and the likes. We'll manage all of the FX risk associated with the lending. So we're hedging back everything and ensuring that at the end of the day, any cash that's mopped up or available is, as you mentioned before, it's available in base currency to pay down debt, to invest, to whatever. We also would, in those sorts of structures, manage intercompany netting. Again, if you think about it, you're trying to keep all of those internal flows, internal FX exposures centered, in a particular area. In this case, kind of an in-house bank type idea. That then we're managing all of the processes, and then in addition to that, for lots of clients, we would run an internal cash flow hedge program. So in other words, let's say we have an in-house bank and it might be a US balance sheet or a UK balance sheet, whatever it is. Yes, we have a German subsidiary and it has a dollar exposure. Well, they will hedge that using an internal FX with the in-house bank, which will allow the in-house bank to kind of consolidate all of those exposures up and hedge them back out. So by housing those ranges of treasury processes in one place, it means you can get a lot of benefit for a corporate. And then so to bring that back then, Doug, to your original question, why the heck, that's all very well and we know that, but why would you outsource it? The reality is, right, to do all of those things takes a significant amount of resource. It takes a significant amount of systems. Really importantly, it takes a lot of system integration. So data flow, trade flow, cash flow information. It all needs to be consolidated, even market data, accounting output. It all needs to be consolidated up. And it takes a lot of implementation knowledge, right? So why would you outsource it? Because it's blinking hard to get done on your own. Is one of the answers. For instance, if you look at a US multinational who may want to manage their global cash, right? For one, US time zone isn't great, so it's better to have someone managing that out of Europe, and we've seen that lots of times with people having a regional treasury centre out of Europe. But then if you think about it, right, you can't have two guys sitting in an office in Europe. The risk is too high, right? You don't have segregation of duties, you don't have management oversight. It's very difficult to produce that. So suddenly you're looking at a requirement to have a team of maybe 4, 5 FTEs. You need systems in place. They need to create all that infrastructure. So to create what you need to create, you have a significant expense and indeed a significant risk, ongoing operational and implementation. So when we get in front of people and explain our methodology, how we could do this, we can roll it out, we can customize it, but generally we're speaking about an IT infrastructure that we already have in place. It is an attractive proposition, and then we have economies of scale from a pricing perspective. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. So, Justin, we want to deep dive into this because that's super interesting, and the whole system part of it. Let's keep that for in a few minutes, and finish on the what is Treasury Outsourcing. I think you've given quite some pros here, and on the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast, we like to play a bit the devil's advocate as well. So, in all transparency, not talking about FTI, but Treasury outsourcing in general, we clearly understand the pros. You named it: resources, cost allocation, implementation effort. It's not only time, it's money, it's like all the stuff that you might not have the time or budget to put in within the company. But so the things that can be achieved maybe better when outsourcing seems quite clear. What is, on the contrary, better achieved in-house? What will be the cons of Treasury outsourcing? If any, but I suspect
you see, okay, so I view Treasury as things that can be outsourced and probably things that can't be outsourced, right? So, and I think we've probably covered some of those, but we would, I mean, we'll probably talk about this a little bit in the future, but the cons of Treasury outsourcing are that you can't outsource everything. Do you know what I mean? So that's the main one. Now, but I think your question is, of the things you do outsource, what sort of are the cons? And that's a fair question as well. And the one that we typically come up against, because when we're out talking to potential clients, generally speaking, our competition, it's not another third party, it's the client themselves. So they're deciding, should we do this ourselves, or should we get these guys to do it? Do you know what I mean? So and as you say, the pros you can show kind of, they're actually quite quantifiable, right? They're numeric, they're risk reduction, etc. The main con that we kind of come up against is this concept of losing control and risk. Okay, so that our job then as a service provider is to try to mitigate that. That's our role, because as you say, the pros are sort of evident. So typically if a let's say a group treasurer is not used to this sort of structure, the sort of outsourcing concept, immediately saying, well, hang on, I'm handing over control of potentially significant levels of funds, handing over control of very high profile processes within our organization, which if they're not done right can come back and bite me. I'm potentially not growing my team numbers because I have this resource here. And these are all the sort of perceived cons, I think, that would be commonly out there. Now, look, in my role here, it's obviously my job to say that we can overcome all of them. but people in reality, people's characteristics and people's cultural views may lead them to believe that, look, this isn't for me, and that's fine. That's a totally valid approach if that's what people wish. It's often very easy to if people raise these issues, concerns, or worries or whatever. It's very easy for us to counteract them actually by both sort of third-party verification I mentioned, we're SOC 1 tested, so that takes a lot of the kind of risk element away. We're also regulated.
What is that? Sorry, I don't know.
Standard operation controls. So each year we are audited by a third-party international audit firm, not for numbers, but for processes. So to make sure the things that we do are being done in a secure and safe way. So that's, everything from executing a deal to settling a deal to confirming a deal. It's a full-on process. It's a big commitment from us actually to get it done. But particularly in the US, it's an expectation of service providers. And for instance, our clients' internal audit functions would rely heavily on that audit being undertaken from a kind of a security perspective.
So that's interesting, because in my business knowledge, which is limited, very very much so, I understand outsourcing. If I just look at outsourcing typically, and if I take myself out of Treasury for a second, typically you'd outsource because it's not worth it to hire someone for that process right now, until you reach the scale at which it would make sense for me to just bring this in-house because it would actually be cheaper or whatever, right? But you didn't say that. You didn't say as of a certain size. And I think we've spoken as well beforehand. You work with big companies as well. So why is that not the case with Treasury outsourcing? Why is scale not the
scale? I think, and here's the rub of it. Perhaps one person can process 1,000 invoices, right? But you need 10 people to process 10,000 invoices. Okay. Now, in Treasury, one person can deal $100 million, right? But that same person could do 10 billion. so there's an element of the value gets bigger, right? But the volume doesn't necessarily get bigger. Now it doesn't. I'm being a little bit facetious. Obviously, it does.
You can be in more countries. You can have more FXs to manage. You can have
exactly, and you can have more currency pairs. But it's not that exponential. You got 50,000 invoices rather than 1,000, right? It goes from 100 bank accounts to 200 bank accounts. That sort of thing. The other thing is that what we do. Our clients become very comfortable with it. So if they, for instance, keep on growing, they find it difficult to justify changing what is already working. To be blunt about it,
don't fix if it isn't broken.
Like I think our clients always tell us if we knew about we don't understand why more people don't do this. Is one thing they say, and the other thing they say is, the other thing that always happens, and we love this, is that often. Our clients, the group treasurer will have an assistant treasurer, and the assistant treasurer will then get a job somewhere else as a group treasurer, and it's one of our best sources of clients. It's marketing at its peak, So
that means your services you provide.
Well, that's what we read into it, and we do go out of our way to get feedback on that, because we need to be providing. So it gets back to that concept, right, of the added value service that we talked about earlier on. We need to keep on pushing forward, and finding the new thing, So I mentioned, like for instance, we would have been one of the first outsourced providers to provide a turnkey netting solution, intercompany netting solution, and that's proved really popular with our clients because it's an easy rolloutable, easily benefitable, and there's a definable, quantified financial benefit to clients of doing that, right? We've also developed, pretty robust forecasting and cash visibility processes. Again, using third-party tools. We'll talk about them in a while. These are things that are attractive, right? But if you look at like every year we'll do a review of all the sort of what's hot in Treasury sort of surveys that get done. So every year we'll do a review of them, and we'll ensure that our modular services are tailored towards what the requirement is. Generally, we're ahead of the curve, but we just want to make sure we're sort of there or thereabouts.
I'm also conscious of the fact that previously, when we asked you what activities can be outsourced and whatnot, we didn't let you finish and give us a full list. So could you just rant off what are the Treasury activities that get done that are outsourceable? Sure. Which ones are not? And maybe which ones go into a service center, just because I'm still,
no, fair enough. So let's just be clear about that, right? Okay. So from an outsourcing perspective, in our business, okay, and generally speaking, in the outsourced world, which I have to say is not a huge world, right? It's a kind of a boutique world in which we operate. I mentioned that there are a bundle of services that sit within kind of what we would refer to as kind of an in-house banking structure, and it doesn't, that's just an umbrella term, okay? And within that, we would see cash and liquidity management, intercompany loan management, FX risk management, cash visibility and forecasting, intercompany netting, intercompany FX programs, and then other things like perhaps bank system management, bank fees management, spot FX, those sorts of daily tasks where every day someone has to come in. They need to see what the position is in every currency. They need to position that. They need to invest it. It's those sorts of daily management of the group oil that we would often manage. The second sort of structure that we see is what we would refer to as kind of a back office accounting and systems service. Okay, so under this model, and this is actually another, it's completely different model in many ways. So under this model, rather than outsourcing a particular defined process, we're providing a sort of foundation or a fundamental level at which the treasury function as a whole can operate. So let me give you kind of how that might look. So I think that will make more sense before I give you the sort of tasks that we do. So let's say a treasurer is sitting somewhere, and he has an assistant treasurer and two strategic analysts. Okay, now they can make all the decisions. They can do all the trading. They can execute all of their strategies within that small team of 3 or 4 people, right? But what they don't have is the infrastructure environment, the systems environment, right? They don't have the backup in terms of people who can do the settlements, the bank recs, the confirmations, issue intercompany statements, all that sort of stuff, right? And they also don't have the technical accounting support there. Okay, so they've got all the core strategic treasury stuff, but sort of none of the kind of level stuff that holds it together.
So you take them from 0 to 1, like you're plug and play.
Precisely. So under those services, like, so if you think about it, they go, okay, well, look, we want you to manage it. So they'll have access to our treasury management system. That would be the key. It's a third-party system, by the way. We use third-party systems.
Can you say which one?
Yeah, CGI Twin is the one that we use. We've worked with them for a long time. But like, we're agnostic to systems, to be honest. Even though we work very well with CGI Twin, it works well. We do work with other systems as well. But they will have access to the system, and that's kind of the link, right, between, traditionally they would be what we would refer to as the front office, right, and then we're providing all the back office and middle office services, and it flows all very seamlessly because we have all of the integration in place. So they'll probably trade over FXall, it'll integrate STP with the TMS. We'll manage all the Finastra sort of confirmations and all that sort of stuff, so, and then we'll produce the accounting output. So like, under those, what we refer to, that's what we refer to as kind of operation outsourcing. We would do back office activities, which would be bank recs, confirmation, settlements, reporting, bank information flow and integration. So we'll take all of the data from the banks and get it into the TMS, so the front office team can have visibility of that. Then from a middle office perspective, we'll be doing kind of treasury accounting, which might be management accounts, hedge accounting, hedge documentation, general sort of reporting around the accounting, static data management, and really importantly, under most of our structures, we provide a direct STP accounting file into our client's ERP environment. So the TMS will produce a GL mapped accounting file, which will flow just on an SFTP basis straight into whatever it is, generally SAP or one of the big accounting systems. So it's kind of it's very seamless from that perspective. And then obviously, kind of gelling all that together is kind of the systems infrastructure. So the TMS, dealing platform, rate feeds, confirmation systems, integration with banks, integration with Swift, and importantly, as I mentioned, kind of we also have a cash forecasting system that we use, which also is great for kind of cash consolidation and reporting and stuff like that.
Okay, cool. And so what are the tasks that typically you would even advise treasury departments against outsourcing? What are those tasks?
So from a daily task perspective, there's not much really, to be honest, that can't be done, right? But the sorts of things that we would not see outsourced, to be perfectly blunt, would be funding. The management of the funding book, right? So the funding plan, the implementation of the funding plan, negotiations. All of the high level strategic elements, right? But at the end of the day, if a treasurer has agreed an RCF, there's not much value in his assistant treasurer picking up a phone and drawing down £1 million because they need it, right? Anyone could do that, right? So that's the kind of the daily operations of that can be done pretty simply on an outsourcing basis.
But the partnership side of things is the part that you wouldn't.
Relationships,
partnerships,
internal culture can be important, right? Understand and strategy development and risk appetite, they are individual to any particular organization. It can often depend on the type of organization. Most of our companies are listed companies, but we do deal with some very big privately owned companies. And generally speaking, they probably have a little more tolerance for risk, right? Because they're not reporting to the market and stuff like that. Yeah. But even within the listed companies, there can be quite a divergent attitude towards exposure risk management and their view on that. And also, strategies in relation to things like interest rate hedging, FX hedging, commodity hedging, very much driven by the business view. And whilst we're embedded in the business as much as possible, really that needs to sit in kind of a risk committee that has both business heads, treasury heads, and kind of finance heads in it. Do you know what I mean? It's not a decision that can be, or a policy that can be developed solely by Treasury in isolation, and therefore it's not really outsourceable. You need to be in the business, know the people, know the business well.
I like that. So as a treasurer, you just get to do all the fun strategic stuff, and you give the day-to-day stuff to someone else outside.
Correct. Yeah, and like to be honest, we often operate in very much a hybrid environment. Okay, so for instance, we would have a lot of US companies. Okay, that would have massive amounts of daily cash management requirements, investments, etc., domestically in the US, right? So they have a team managing that. Yet they don't want the deal. By the time they come into work, they want to know that Europe's sorted and how many dollars do they have out of Europe to mess with. And that's where we sit in. We can sit in and say, we'll manage all that, and we'll also manage the intercompany netting, and we'll always also manage the European FX, and you'll have all of that information and any of that cash available for you when you arrive in the morning. And your team can then do the sort of the finessing, and that's a very popular model, to be honest. It kind of a hybrid model, where a corporate has recognised that they kind of need a regional treasury centre somewhere, but they don't necessarily want to invest in the FTEs and the infrastructure or take on the risk of having it itself. Exactly. Yeah.
And so Ireland, my understanding of it as a hub, and we spoke to Amy Cullen about this, which I know you were with as well, where she said that, look, Ireland used to be the treasury hub of definitely Europe, if not globally, because of the tax incentives originally. And what happened over time was, because of that, you had this whole ecosystem of treasury built up there. And then out of that, even though the tax incentives are gone, it's still seen as a hub for treasury operations globally. So there's the element of you just have the expertise there, but is there also the element of just time zone wise? Yeah. Is it
to be honest? Yeah.
Companies, what's the consideration there? Why?
There's a couple of considerations. There's what you mentioned there, right? There's the sort of expertise. sort of like in a global world, right? Expertise is fairly fluid, as you know. And if I look around me in Dublin, we're also the hub for Google and Meta, and the diversity within their workforce is amazing to see. It's amazing to see these people from all over the world. So that kind of labour mobility is a big thing, right? So yeah, we do have a particular kind of set of skills, but there's also companies like FTI that have just developed, right? So we have, over the years we developed skills, structures, etc., that are able to do this. But to get back to your kind of core question, what is it like? As I mentioned, we would have a significant number of US clients, right? And obviously Ireland is in an excellent place from a time zone perspective.
Can you explain that? Why is it? What benefit does a US client get to having an Irish outsourcing?
Well, it's more the time. Not necessarily Ireland, you know what I mean, but it's more the time zone. So we can effectively bridge the whole. Well, European time is obviously we're fine with, but we can also bridge a lot of the APAC sort of time zones if necessary, and. A lot of our clients would have significant operations in kind of in Western Europe in general, and then out into the kind of further regions of South Africa, etc., etc. So we're all we're able to manage all of the cash within those zones within cut-off times that would be quite tight actually if you were trying to manage it out of the US. In terms of getting value and getting trades away and stuff like that. So that is attractive. The other thing that's attractive, obviously, is that we're native English speakers. So everybody is able to communicate, and then
even they understand the Irish accent.
That's fair enough.
So strong statement, native English speakers.
I'll start speaking in Gaelic now, and you won't understand anything. Neither will I. And then we also have an advantage in that we're from a logistics perspective, we're easy to get to actually from the US. So there's loads of flights in and out. We have a visa clearance. We have US visa clearance within Dublin, which makes things a little bit easier. And Dublin's a great place to visit, so why wouldn't you want to have
was it highest number of pubs per capita or something like this? Isn't it something like that?
So yeah, like
super cool.
Yeah, it's it has evolved, though, I have to say. And your initial comment in that it's somewhere where people look to when they're looking at these sorts of things is because it's where people have done it before, right? And who wants to be, who was the first man to eat an oyster? You know what I mean? You kind of, there is an element of feeling safe with what is being done and what your peers are doing.
I mean, there's this. In that episode we did with Amy, we brought up a quote from Tim Cook at this time as well, which he was saying once on a conference, which was that everyone thinks China's a cheap place to manufacture iPhones, but in reality, it's not that cheap anymore at all. But what it is if you throw a shoe into a crowd, you'll hit 3 milling operators, which in the UK or Europe or wherever else, it
doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. And it's just the expertise is built there now, even if it doesn't. And I see Ireland a bit the same way as well for Treasury. It's like, even though the tax centres aren't there anymore because they were there once upon a time, the expertise is so much there and the knowledge is there, and even the mental association, like you said about, everyone's always done it there, so it's got a brand as a Treasury hub. Google Meta being there definitely helps as well, and I know their Treasury operations are based out of there as well for Google especially. So these kind of things all definitely do matter.
It's funny you should say that, because in addition to that, we would have a lot of the European hubs for the banks here as well, and that again, it's sort of a. So our clients,
it's an ecosystem.
Our clients, generally speaking, they're very large global multinational organisations, and whilst we deal with probably maybe 50 or 60 different banks, like the vast majority of our interaction with banks is probably with a handful of banks, the big global banks that you can probably list off, and they all have a major presence here, which means that, if we're working with a client on a particular structure or managing a particular structure, they're really just around the corner. We know them, it makes for an environment that works well. It's a what's what they refer to as kind of an ecosystem, that everybody can thrive off each other, I think.
Justin, thank you so much for this. I think we have a very strong understanding now of what Treasury outsourcing is and how it functions. So let's deep dive into how it actually works for the corporate, but also for the Treasury outsourcing company. So starting by the beginning on the corporate side, how does the transition happen when a company chooses to outsource some Treasury task? And typically here, I'd like to understand what's the business case in the first place to get Treasury outsourcing, because you mentioned quite some economical value out of it. So I'd like to understand that, like how do you enter into contact with the company that say, okay, I'd like to consider some Treasury outsourcing, or is it a good thing to do? And then how does it typically work? Like, okay, we need to outsource this type of function, or do you educate them on what they should be outsourcing? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, no, that's it's a fair question, and like to answer that question, you kind of, I suppose, you need to examine why a company would wish to outsource. What is the thing that is making them outsource? Because that will often drive how the interaction would proceed. So there's a number. We see a number of sort of different elements to that, and all of them have different nuances, even though at the end of the day it results in us providing some form of service to them. So if I think and these are in no order of sort of preference or anything like that. This is one is as common as the other, but in many cases there might be some kind of catalyst for a requirement for a particular service. Okay, a big one would be something like an acquisition or a spin-off. Okay. So if I think about a client that we onboarded recently enough, and they made they're a very large US-based client. They made an acquisition that all of a sudden massively increased their international footprint. Okay, so now and the acquisition the acquisition they made had a pretty good banking structure in place with one of the global banks that was also a partner bank of that client, right? So now they've made this acquisition. They have a kind of a nice banking structure, and zero balancing or currency pooling or whatever. And they're looking at it and they're going, well, right, how are we going to manage this? So they have a kind of an immediate problem that they need to deal with. So under those circumstances, what we can do is we can step in and say, well, look, we can fix that problem for you very quickly. So that's.
Do they know about it? Sorry, Justin. Do they know about the possibility of outsourcing Treasury, or how does it work here?
Yeah. So that
you look at the mergers and acquisitions news and after those companies.
No, well, we do try to identify opportunities in that realm, but interestingly enough, So we could go out knocking on doors, right? And we could knock on 1 million doors. And the chances of us finding some lad who wants outsource their treasury is reasonably low, in fairness. So we focus on being known at the catalyst point. Okay. So in this case, right, it was a bank. A bank said, "Well, you're struggling with this. You don't know how to manage it. We know these guys do that sort of stuff. Have a word with them." Now they won't necessarily recommend it because they're a bank, right? But they will say that it is a solution that you should investigate. That's what happened in this case. If you think about it, and that happens a lot, right? Because if you think about it, let's say a bank is pitching for a global liquidity structure, okay? Zero balancing in 40 currencies across 30 countries. And they've done all the maths, and it's going to save this company, 10 million a year, and it's going to give them access to $300 million, and it's all brilliant. And the treasurer is going, "That's brilliant. I love it all. Well, how the hell am I going to manage it?" Yeah. So now we have a bank that wants to sell something, right? We have a client that wants to buy something, but there's a bit in the middle about how do we look after this? So if we're close to banks and stuff like that, right, and they can put our solution forward as an option, just as an option. It's just a discussion. We often have discussions and they don't come to fruition, and the bank doesn't get the deal and we don't get the deal or whatever. But it is an option, right? And it's an option that really any corporate looking at one of those significant changes should investigate, right, to see if it's one, see if it's one for them. So that's how it's a very intuitive question, because that is how that comes about, and a lot of our growth is actually from that sort of reference stroke, being with the right person at the right time, and it gets back to that concept of catalyst. So if you can identify the catalyst, then you can see who's the catalyst driver, right? And they're the people that you need to, they're the people that need to understand your potential solution. So I mean, we talked about an acquisition there. So another thing might be just the introduction of a new process. Okay, so let's say a company wishes to implement an intercompany netting process, and again they're saying, okay, great, makes sense. We can. It all adds up. We can see the benefit, but geez, we just don't want the hassle of having to run all that process and manage all that. Well, then we can come in and say, well, look, we can do that, and this is precisely how we'll do it. Again, that's a very straightforward sort of proposition. And then there's also, sometimes, this isn't very often the case, but sometimes people are just looking for cost savings. So they're saying, well, look, I have this going on and it's costing me a fortune. Why can't we just do it this way? Like for instance, right, like let's just take netting as an example, but it could be anything. Companies might have developed an internal netting piece of software, for instance, right? You'd often see that, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of spreadsheets and databases and stuff like that, and there's one guy who kind of knows how it works and no one else in the world does. And
speaking truth here.
Yeah, and you've seen this, right?
That's how we both laugh. We both see that. That's exactly how it goes. And when that person leaves, the two just
exactly. Or a new treasurer comes in and recognises the risk, right? And they go, well, look, there's a better way to do this, and so our services become sort of obvious from that perspective, and then another sort of catalyst for wanting to outsource is a resource issue. So in some jurisdictions, it's virtually impossible to hold a full treasury team, and incredibly expensive. So really, do you remember I mentioned those services where we're providing sort of systems, back office, middle office, right? They're very attractive in those jurisdictions. Northern Europe, Switzerland, places like that. It's hard to hold a treasury team. It's extremely expensive to do it, and a treasurer may just recognise that risk and say, look, let's just do this another way, and let's look. So those are sort of the catalysts. So I sidestepped your question, which is sort of how does it work? So we would generally having had that initial engagement with a client. Okay, our first thing is to understand precisely what their requirements are from a process perspective, and we try to keep that big picture. So we will say, okay, we understand that you have a pooling system, so you need daily cash and liquidity management. That's what this will look like. Okay, so and we would have a reasonably detailed spec. So it'd be things like, okay, we will do the cash positioning, we'll manage all of the ZBA flows, we'll identify the currency flows, we'll hedge them back to base currency within particular risk parameters. We would define quite well in our proposal the things, the steps that will be undertaken. Because in fairness, often clients kind of don't understand them, right? Because they're coming into something new or fresh. It's a new environment. They've made an acquisition. So they need to feel comfortable actually that, what's going to be done is correct. So we would agree that spec. Having done that, we try to take over as much of the implementation effort as is possible. And the reason for that is quite simple, is that we kind of know what we're doing, right? We do it all the time. Okay, so us to integrate a ZBA structure, to get all the bank flow information into our TMS, you do it in a day, whereas if you were trying to do it yourself from scratch, you'd be looking for a developer for 3 weeks, and you kind of would never get done, right? We, for instance, we use FXall generally for trading, but we're agnostic as to what trading platform we would use. But we would have an STP link directly from that into our TMS. Again, if you were trying to create that again, from a starting point, it's a lot of effort. So that's why we take a hands-on approach to the implementation. And really, the only thing we expect from the client is any data that's required. So generally that would be things like, static data, the names of the subsidiaries that will be borrowing. We'll get some tax input around transfer pricing rates that need to be applied, stuff like that. And then we will create the whole atmosphere, the whole environment in terms of the TMS setup and the likes. And then importantly, what we do is we agree a set of procedures with our clients, which kind of generally outline what needs to be done when, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. And we agree that with them. Generally, then we'll move into kind of a testing environment, whereby we'll do things like test accounting flow, for instance, right? So we provide test accounting files into the back end ERP system. We'll do like penny tests on payments. We'll do test deals on the FX platform. And then when we have all of what we call the infrastructure set up, we move into the interfacing phase, which is where we start to roll out those services both internally and externally. All right, so we start dealing with the banks on clients' behalfs, and then we also start all of the internal communications in terms of if there's statements required, if a company, a subsidiary needs to borrow funds, how do they do that? Who do they communicate to, etc., etc. So
I like that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's quite a formal process, and obviously we have a detailed implementation plan and stuff like that. But our main thing is we try to do as much as possible. That's the sort of driving force. And like, to be honest, we're doing that because yes, it's attractive to clients because they're kind of going, okay, cool. But day one, they need to trust you, right? So they're on board with us, and we hold weekly calls and all that sort of stuff. And also, to be honest, it's easier for us to manage the implementation because we do it so often. We kind of know how to go about it, and as long as our clients have confidence in us and we're showing progress in the right way, then it works very well for both parties.
How do the corporates keep score? That's one of the things you mentioned in the cons, right? The losing control kind of. How do you mitigate that as a treasury outsourcing company? Like, how do you make sure the company can keep an eye or even control over what is done by the company to which they outsource? How does that?
It's a good question, and kind of a fundamental part of the trust that you need to build. That you need to build with clients, and there's an element of sort of pre-engagement. You need to demonstrate the ability to do that. So pre-engagement with a new client, we for a start will always encourage them to talk to some of our current clients, right? To understand the field, because we have formal processes around this, which I'll explain to you in a minute, right? But at the end of the day, you need to talk to someone to understand how it works in operations. You can say we have reports, this, that, and the other. But if they don't work, they don't work. So day one, we encourage people to talk to our other clients to understand, to get that feel for how it works. And before I get into the kind of the formal processes that we adopt, it's important to remember that when we engage with a client, we truly become part of their team, right? So we like, our front office team will be interacting with clients every day. You know what I mean? It's a day. There's a daily sort of back and flow of information, depending on what the client requirement is. Some clients want you just to do things and stay away and just give us the end answer, whereas some want to be much more involved. And that's fine. We can accommodate either way. Like if I think of the formal sort of processes though around that, right, because it's all very well for us to have those are kind of informal processes, right? They're kind of their meetings, their communications, and their building a trust, right? And those are probably the important things for the teams, the treasury team, for the assistant treasurer and the treasurer. But try selling them to internal auditor, and you'll be in big trouble. So
definitely.
So we definitely have a very formal approach to this, right? So the first thing that we will do is we will agree risk parameters within the procedures and controls document with all of our clients, right? So if you think about it, those are simple things like, for instance, right, if our exposure is in excess of the currency equivalent of $250,000 US, we want to hedge back to zero. It's a very simple parameter, all right? And so therefore we will look at currency exposures resulting from all of the activities that we're undertaking, and if they breach that limit, we'll hedge them back to zero. And we produce reports on a daily basis that will show that all exposures are within those limits. We'll operate within counterparty exposure limits for investments. For instance, you might say you're only allowed to have up to 100 million in that money market fund, etc., etc. So the general risk parameters that you would expect to see in any treasury policy in reality also would apply to the operations that we undertake. So that's one very well defined way. Now we produce daily reports for all of our clients that will sort of prove that we're operating within those activities, and that's very important. The other things that are important are those third party accreditations that I mentioned, about the SOC 1 and stuff like that, and also we welcome our clients' internal audit in, whenever needs be. The other thing, right, just to put a bigger sort of framework on it, right, is that we day one we create an infrastructure that is very risk averse for a client. Okay, so all of our clients have their own TMS database, for instance. Okay, they have their own bank accounts, which are their bank accounts. Okay, you know what I mean? There's no commingling of funds, none of that sort of stuff. Everything is ring fenced on a client by client basis, and that will include FX dealing relationships, for instance, and importantly, really importantly, the banking systems. So bank accounts and banking systems, there's no mix, commingling or anything like that. Each client is operating within their own defined environment. They have their own defined standard settlement instructions established within that environment. And to give you a concept as to how that works, right? We for instance will be set up, because we need to make settlements. Okay, we're doing FX deals. We need to make settlements on behalf of clients. But we will be set up within the EB systems to only be allowed to make payments to a bank account where there is a locked down pre-format template in place. If you think about that, right? Now, to put that lockdown pre-format template in place, we generally will input it, but then it would need to be approved by our client. Do you see what I mean? So they have ultimate control over that sort of payment environment, and we have lots of other sort of control, system-based controls in place that ultimately limit the risk. So there's a number, to get back to your key question is how do they keep an eye on us? We have a kind of an established framework in terms of systems. That means that only certain things can be done. It's only possible to do certain things within that environment. And then in terms of kind of risk elements and risk reporting, we have both those soft communications, but also importantly, we have the kind of the daily reporting that will be produced. And then the final sort of guard on that, I suppose, is our accounting process. So we run accounting processes for clients at least monthly, but a lot of the time either daily or weekly, to be honest. And obviously that's kind of a control. And even things like we undertake bank recs on a daily basis for all clients, and then we have to kind of prove those bank recs. So there's all the sort of controls you would expect, and then the external reporting back to clients as well.
Very clear. Okay, so a lot of it is around making sure that, again, you're plug and play, right? Every time, as soon as they come in, they get access to all of this infrastructure, all of this systems and everything straight away.
Yeah.
And is the integration there's just a lot to set up, right? What's the onboarding process like for a corporate in that sense? Like, how much time does it take to get ramped up then?
Yeah, so it's not as complicated as you might think. The key external integration that we need to do is generally to integrate with corporate's bank. But as I mentioned, generally speaking, we're dealing with a handful of the big banks, right? So they're pretty well used to it, as are we. And then on the back end, reintegrate back into the ERP system from an accounting perspective. And then if people are going down the forecasting route, then we'd also look for sort of ERP integration from an underlying AR and AP perspective, to get those data flows. But again, these are things that we do all the time, so they don't generally take as long as you might expect. So we would generally say that if we're onboarding a client, the implementation phase is anything from 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the complication of the process that they're putting in place. But even kind of a pretty complex client, generally 12 weeks we'll get us set up. Often our clients actually like to slow it down, so we'll put all the infrastructure in place, but the kind of, you need to have an internal change management process as well, right? You don't be scaring people off by giving them too much to bite off. So for instance, we might introduce just the management of the daily pools, right, and then layer on maybe netting at a later date, then maybe layer on some FX at a later date. So there are there are kind of ways of softly progressing.
Yeah. Treasurers are very risk adverse people. Is the common theme that keeps coming up in most of the conversations that we have. So yes, you guys have the certification. Again, apologies for pushing and being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, but you have the certification, you have the clients' testimonials, they've spoken to your clients, whatnot. Nonetheless, you're another counterparty risk for them, right? In most situations.
Well,
or not.
I suppose just to be clear, we are a service risk, but we are not a credit counterparty risk at all. Just to be clear on that, do you know what I mean?
Explain the difference.
Well, there is no financial exposure to us in terms of funds. If
you're executing trades,
we
right?
are executing.
You have access to bank accounts.
We are executing trades, but we're not. There is no funds held in the name of FTI Finance on behalf of clients. Do you see what I mean? So there is an execution risk. There will be an execution risk. Yeah. There's an execution risk everywhere, and our argument is that if you have your execution in a well-managed and controlled environment, it's much less risky than having it in a kind of a two-man shed in Benelux or something like that. Sorry, not to cast aspersions, but no, you know what I mean. Like if you look at where kind of treasury disasters have happened in the past, right? It's always been sort of a very small satellite, not correctly controlled environment. If you think of from an Irish concept, we had John Rusnak in the trading on behalf of Irish banks in the US in a small office. Do you know what I mean? And there's been various other corporate sort of disasters which I won't go into, but they've always been in that's sort of where the risk is lies. So we would suggest that it's safer to have it in a well controlled environment with a reasonably large team. That is well segregated.
I think what Husam meant as well is in a sense of you hold processes and knowledge, right? Especially if you outsource for an extended period of time. Yeah. The Treasury department and the company is completely reliant on, we're saying you, but Treasury outsourcing services in general, right? Yeah. Not FTI in particular, but you outsource some strategy, you outsource how the money is managed and how certain things are executed, and you might lose knowledge. But actually, whilst we were asking, I'm also thinking, that's the same thing if an employee would leave. If a small treasury department has one of their key employee leaving, you're in the same embarrassment as if your treasury outsourcing company
is more likely to leave than treasury outsourcing.
Actually,
is likely to.
Well, I see one of our points, I suppose, is that we are a treasury outsourcing company. That's all we do, right? So if we leave, we don't exist anymore. Whereas in the past, in the past, in fairness, like banks were big in this, and they did leave people high and dry, and it was a problem. Do you know what I mean? But
because they were doing other
correct, So whereas this is our core business, we're in it for the long run. It's a key selling point. We have a very well defined strategy in terms of corporate treasury and outsourcing. That is our strategy. If we don't claim to be anything other than that, we know it's a niche market, but we believe that we can perform very highly in a niche market, and that's a good space for us to be in. So yeah, like I hear what you're saying, but one of our selling points is that we have this team, right, and you're not exposed to that person leaving. You have this cross-trained team of people that are doing things. And if at some stage in the future you want to bring it back in-house, you're dealing with a professional organisation that'll help you do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not going to just run away and leave you high and dry. If things change, and for whatever reason, like for instance, if one of our clients gets acquired, right? The new acquirer might take the view that, oh, no, look, we're already managing some of this stuff in-house, so we'll migrate that. Grant, we'll help you get there.
We'll do the handover.
Yeah, exactly. So
long game.
you need to tease through the detail to understand the risk profile, I think, of the business model. And I think from our perspective, the sort of the proof of the pudding is the fact that we're dealing with some really, really large multinationals, with massive audit requirements and internal audit, and we pass the muster on all those, and before we ever well, not always, but generally speaking, before we go live, engage with a client or sign a contract, we're subject to massive due diligence from both kind of an IT perspective and a kind of a process and internal audit perspective. Sometimes to the extent where you're kind of wondering why does he need to know what colour my socks are? But look, we're happy to do that. That's the nature of the business.
So take us through that, and so move over to what does it mean for you when a new client comes in? So what does that look like? And indeed, so I guess why we're saying this is Treasury is such an integral part of the oil of the company, as you mentioned it before, right? So and it's what you said as well, perhaps the only reservation that people have typically with service is just lack of control, almost, or the perceived lack of control, right? At the end of the day, if you're reporting very transparently, if everything is in place, if they have full transparency into your systems whenever they want, if you're complying with all audit requests, then none of that actually exists. It's just a perception that, hey, how can I have someone else managing my bank accounts?
Yeah, but so we as I said, we rarely operate in a bubble. Okay, so we have all of our clients. We have a boss. It's like a boss, right? And it might be the assistant treasurer, or it might be the head trader or something like that. But he's our boss man, kind of, right? And we are engaged with that person all the time. So they're well aware of kind of what's going on, and they're fully in control. We take direction from them, so they are controlling, right? So really, how do you control a team of people is what you're asking, and again, it's easier to control a team of people when they're a third party in many ways, because they are subject to much stricter contractual requirements than
applications,
just people who are working for you. So the control element is actually overcome very quickly once people kind of understand the sort of the risk environment, as I said, the infrastructural environment, and then also sort of the manner in which business is undertaken. And you asked, when a client comes in and talks to us, how do we explain that? Well, we actually will sit down and walk them through our sort of processes, how we do things, and show them in our office, physically how this works. And how the communications works, the sort of reporting they'll see, and then we also, obviously, you always will offer to undertake any kind of due diligence or whatever sort of requirements that are required. So it's something that ironically doesn't really it comes up, right, but it comes up and it gets dealt with reasonably quickly. It doesn't become a sticking point.
Super interesting. Take us into the systems that you use then, Justin, because we've dabbled on it for a bit of time now. Can you share names where you feel comfortable sharing names? Which systems do you use? Which ones are built in house? And which ones do you use religiously yourself and stand by?
Yeah, treasury technology is a dark art, isn't it?
Because we've had a few different vendors on. We've had Kariba on, we've had FIS on, we've had a few fintechs on, a lot of FX platforms we've had on as well to discuss those, because they're obviously experts in each of them. So we have already, our listeners have a bit of an idea of the overall landscape. But
fair enough.
As you are the experts in treasury, as in that's why people should come to you. What systems are you using?
Well, so we would view us as kind of practitioners, right? So we're, as you say, we're kind of at the coal face, right? The users of these systems. So we've nothing to kind of gain from saying yay or nay against them. We just want to make sure that they operate well. So first of all, just to answer your question straight up, we use third-party software. We are not software developers. We don't believe that that's where we need to be be blunt about it. We paint ourselves as experts in managing treasury, and if I went into a really large multinational company, many of them would run a mile if they saw that they were developing their own internal software. And as you know, some do, but they generally at some stage decide that this wasn't a great idea. Let's go and get a third party who'll manage this all on our behalf. So just to start with that, so what we do is we have built a treasury infrastructure that we believe works very well for our clients and is best fit for our clients. But to be blunt with you, I would be reasonably agnostic around most of the systems, in that most of them do what they say they'll do, to a greater or better extent, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'm actually probably not going to say names, because we deal with lots of different systems providers in general. I told you who our main treasury management system is, and they're great, but you know, it is, at the end of the day, it's a treasury management system. Do you know what I mean? And maybe it's more about the relationship, and we've been using that system for a long time.
Used to it.
We've built a lot of integration. Right, we know the system. We have a lot of stuff going on with it that makes sense for us. But if you were to start from the beginning, I'm sure it'd be an absolute beast to try to get to put in place. You know, so I'd start by saying, like, you know, that really, in reality, I feel a lot of the systems can do what they say, and then it's up to sort of personal preference, you know, around that. The other thing I'd say is that we have generally gone out and looked for systems that do specific things that we want to do, right? What the hell what does that mean? Like in my books, right, gone are the day of the treasury management system, right? And it does everything. You know, like, we've become into a much more modular world where, you know, you have your core treasury management system, but then you have other systems that do other things because they're specialists in that area and they do them really well, rather than just trying to rely on one name to kind of do everything. So if I briefly outline what our sort of infrastructure looks like, okay, so yeah, we have our core database, which would be the treasury management system itself, the TMS. And then, generally speaking, from a front office perspective, we're using one of the FX trading platforms. That would be the main, you know, our main dealing is in FX. Now, we do, you know, a lot of money markets and deposits and stuff like that, but from a volume perspective and a value perspective, our main dealing is in FX. So we use we use FXO, but we also use 360T. So, you know, we're happy to use any sort of trading platform. But if people ask us, just because we have it well integrated, we generally will fall towards the FXO platform. We will have that STP'd directly into our TMS. So trade gets done, gets polled every 2 or 3 minutes, I think, something like that. So it's almost instantly into our treasury management system. On the back of that, we have the industry standard confirmation system. Again, instant flow through in terms of when the deal gets executed. So you're talking, you know, between confirmation and execution, really short turnaround to catch any potential issues that may arise. On the back of that, so that's, you know, that's 3 sort of integration systems, right? We have FX dealing, we have confirmations, and we have the core TMS. The other system that we would use, and we mentioned earlier on, would be we have a cash reporting and forecasting system. We actually currently use 2 of them depending on the client's requirements, and that is integrated in a number of ways. It's integrated with the treasury management system to get all details of treasury flows. We'll have it integrated with the banking system, so that we have, you know, kind of opening cash balances and cash, you know, actual cash flows that we can, you know, do actual forecast for and stuff like that. And then additionally, we generally will have that forecasting system integrated with our client's ERP side. So, you know, to get the AP and AOR. So again, you have a system, a modular system of the forecasting that is then integrated on our side with the banking system and the TMS, and then also linked in from a forecasting perspective with the client side ERP. Also, importantly, you know, obviously that's a kind of a cloud-based, web-based system. So we're not doing forecasting in isolation, right? We need to know what's happening around the world. We need to know what are the flows going to be in France, what are the flows going to be in Germany. So whilst we will try to obtain all the AP and AOR information on a global basis, if there is a global ERP, in many cases, as you know, there might be a global ERP with a couple of fellas won't be on it in Spain and 2 lads in Portugal won't be on it either. So obviously there's access. There's local access from a forecasting perspective as well to be able to kind of input, and also they might have one-off tax payments or something like that. So we provide access globally to that forecasting system. So there's another system, that's the cash reporting and forecasting system. Obviously we have kind of market feeds coming in from various different areas, which will help us produce mark to markets and all that sort of stuff. And then our other main integration from our systems integration from the TMS perspective is with the banking systems. So we need to be getting the MT940s or CAMPs or whatever they are out of each of the banking systems and into our TMS, so we can track what's going on. We can do bank recs, we can track intercompany movements, we can apply interest to them, all that sort of good stuff. And on the flip side, we need to be able to get payment files back out of the TMS in there. So we're providing all of that sort of in environment in terms of the banking integration. And then probably the final key integration that we do, which is pivotal really, to be honest, is the integration of our treasury management system with the back-end accounting system of our client. I mentioned that before. It's often SAP or one of the big kind of ERP systems. And what we will do is we will produce a precisely mapped treasury accounting file that will go into that system. So that can be really complicated, so it could have, in some cases we have like hedge accounting for derivatives that's split up between the time value, the option value, and the remaining points, and you're putting
lovely stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And half it's going to OCI and the other half's going to God knows where. But so it can be really complicated like that, or it can be pretty basic, right? It can be just, this is the intercompany balance between the treasury entity and whatever, and this is the accrued interest. So the important thing is that it flows and it happens and it works easily for the accounting team, really, on the far side, because the last thing we need to do is create any sort of friction between treasury and accounting, because what we're doing is making their job harder. So one of our selling points is also, look, from an accounting perspective, we'll make this a lot easier for you. The last sort of system is obviously the netting system that we use. So again, we use the brand leader, I suppose, in reality, globally from a netting perspective, and we integrate that both with the TMS to get any kind of intercompany netting flows that might be coming up, and then importantly, we help all of our clients to integrate it either with a centralized ERP environment, so if they have AP and AR on a global basis, great. But again, more often than not, we have a mixture between kind of centralized and then localized uploads of invoices and the likes. So that's kind of, it's fair to you lads if you caught all that, because it was a lot in 3 minutes.
So, that's good. I think you laid out the pillars of a good treasury organization, essentially. So I think that was really interesting. Because it was, as I understand it, I guess there's 2 ways in which you work with companies then, right? There's the way in which maybe they have a very basic treasury operation at the moment, it's just some line on Excel, or indeed they have a huge growth phase, like an acquisition or something like this, that requires all of a sudden a proper treasury infrastructure. In that case, they can just tap into your systems. It's kind of the flow of information, data, and executions is everything's coming through their ERP. It goes out into your systems and then comes back into their system already managed, right? Correct. That's one setup. And in that sense, you're using all of the systems that you just mentioned there. The other setup is where there is an existing treasury team, there's an existing treasury operation, maybe there's a new group treasurer that came in and says, hey, look, we need to start outsourcing some of this stuff so that we can do it at scale. It can be done better. We're not doing netting. We should get someone to do netting or whatever, right? Something like this. Yeah. And in which case there is treasury infrastructure already in place inside the company, and then you're kind of coming in on top. In that setup, I guess it's a bit of a match between what of their systems you use and what of your system you use. Do you just get access to their softwares? Like, how does that?
Yeah, like if required, we get access to their software. But generally speaking, if there is any kind of integration, we try to automate it. So generally speaking, if there is a requirement, for instance, to use their treasury management system, or for them to have a full treasury database, we may still use our treasury management system, but then extract a file which will be directly uploaded into theirs. So do you see what I mean? So there's kind of ways and means around it.
And you'd rather do that. You'd rather keep your system and run it with that because I guess you're experts.
Correct, and it's fully, the environment is fully integrated. To be honest with you, Sammy, so we're trying to, I suppose we're trying to get efficiencies where possible. Another thing I didn't mention, just to kind of bring it into the fore as well, is that we have a really significant RPA suite in place, so robotic process automation in place, whereby we are using that to undertake nearly all of our cross application processes, if that makes sense. So now when our dealing team comes in the morning, all of the information that they need from a cash positioning perspective is already there, right? So our robots have gone off, they've got all the statements, they've integrated them into a system, they've gone to the Treasury management system, they'll have put that all into the relevant database, it'll have gone and got currency rates, it'll gone and tell you what's maturing. Do you know what I mean? So and we're methodically going through all of our processes to try to do that, because to be blunt about it, we have people here who are quite skilled, and the last thing we kind of need them doing is opening spreadsheets and
logging.
Exactly. So that's something that we've really invested heavily in. It also was a massive risk reduction. There's no fat finger risk coming into play. So it has multiple benefits. And it also has a business benefit, to be blunt, in that you don't need as much resource to be able to undertake the process.
Just an automation boutique is one of our sponsors.
That's right.
That's what the line is as well. Is
exactly.
RPA automation for companies.
Exactly, and some of the stuff that they're doing is great in terms of, as you say, eliminating the risk and bringing in a kind of a more streamlined process.
Justin, how does it? Because I'm keep asking myself this question, and maybe some people in the industry will as well. If you use your own system, it means the cash at some point needs to move from the client system, or the information needs to move from the client system to your system to then go back to the client system. But so to take a very practical example to understand how it works, if we take the netting part, for instance, what does it mean that you aggregate? Do you create one instance per client within your netting system? Or do you say, okay, and that's one of the other questions we want to ask you, we integrate it into the pool of the other clients' data, and then we net everything. So that's major benefits, obviously, but then you mix everybody. Or how does it work?
No, we definitely do not do the latter, which is the mixing of everybody.
Okay.
That's just
which would make sense.
Just a big no-no. To be blunt, there is no commingling of financial assets at all. Just to be clear, every client is very much ring-fenced and bucketed within their own legally owned systems, databases, and bank accounts, and they're nothing to do with us. They are theirs 100%. All we are doing is providing an infrastructure and a resource to undertake particular processes. So, for instance, when we onboard a new, let's just stick with netting because it's easy, right? Well, maybe it's not easy.
Understandable.
I shouldn't say that, should I?
Yeah, exactly.
When we onboard a new netting client, we will go out to our netting software provider and get a new netting database for that client. Do you know what I mean? And it is specifically for that client. The login will be whatever at the client's name. It's a specific defined database. All of the information flow that goes in there will come from client data sources, be them ERP, manual, other invoice systems, whatever. And it will only be those clients' data sources, and the net values will only be the netted values of that client. The net values will be sometimes they're traded cash, sometimes they're done across, intercompany accounts. So we can do it either way. If they are traded in cash, the trades are done with their clients' counterparty banks in that client's name, execution on behalf of, and then they are settled across that client's bank accounts. So, it's very much ring-fenced, no commingling. We are just providing an infrastructure and a resource to get certain processes done. And it's important. It's a good question because it's important that people would sort of understand that.
No, 100%. Take us into how you like. I guess let's stick to the netting example of outsourcing, right? So let's go all the way through to netting, outsourcing. A company comes to you and say, Corporate Treasury 101 is coming to you and saying, hey, Justin, we're getting massive with all of our sponsors and our relationships, and we need to start intercompany netting because we have an entity in different places as well and everything like that. And so tell me what happens internally for you. Do you guys have like a netting expert that is across different clients? Or if I also need netting and I need some FX, I need some other operations, do I just get my own FTE out of FTI?
No, we certainly have experts.
Do I get the entire team?
Exactly. We have experts in particular areas, and we do have a netting expert, right? But they will manage the netting process, right? But they don't manage everything to do with it, and that's pretty fundamental, because any of the processes that we undertake are subject to the normal segregation that you would expect within a treasury operation. So whilst all of our clients will have a main contact, that main contact certainly will not do all of the things for a client, if that makes sense. So you make a good point, right? Netting, right? Like for instance, if you're going to cash settle netting, you need to actually execute FX deals. So now you're not just doing netting, right? You're also needing to have access to FX All and probably a treasury management system. You're probably also going to need access to banking systems in order to settle out the netting. Okay, so you say let's just do a bit of netting. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Now, having said that, right, we do have clients who would undertake netting, but then just settle it all on a non-cash basis. So if you think about it, they'll just settle it all across intercompany accounts, create a debit and a credit on a ledger. And instead of having, a receivable to Spain and an owable from Germany and a receivable from USD, you'll just have a single balance with either an in-house bank or some kind of entity, which is, it's a very clean way of managing netting, and much less complex, because now you've removed all of the requirement for FX dealing, cash settlement, bank integration, and all that sort of stuff. So, you mentioned before that we're plug and play. We are plug and play, right? But everything we do is customized for each client. So nothing is the exact same, to be blunt. It all looks a little bit similar, and we obviously have economies of scale and benefits of knowing what we do, but none of it's the exact same, because everybody has slightly different system requirement, slightly different information flow, maybe keen on non-cash versus cash. It's all just that little bit, that little bit different. So, I suppose you ask, like, take us through, how does it look? Let's say, for instance, with netting, like the first thing we need to sit down with a client to do is define what they actually want. Okay, you want netting, and that's fine. But how do you want that to result? Do you know what I mean? And how do you want that
why do you want netting?
Exactly. The other thing we would generally do, just to stick with netting, for instance, is we would look for some of the data on the intercompany flows, which will allow us to define what the likely benefits financial of netting are. I have to say that when we implement netting solutions with clients, generally the financial benefits is what starts, but it's all the other benefits that accrue after that they sort of go, oh geez, this is great. We're centralizing all our cash flows to one sort of day in the month. We've totally cleaned up deflated our balance sheet, because we don't have 1,000,001 intercompany balances. So it's funny, they are often the things that lead through. So defining that sort of data flow is really really important. And then from there, what we generally do is we'll commission the database from the software provider, and then we start working with the IT team of the client to see how they want to get the AP and AR data in and importantly out, because there's two elements to it, right? Anything that's, you need to get information in so that it can get netted and settled, and then you need to get information out so that it can get cash allocated effectively across the ERP. So once we've done that, then we generally move into kind of user training perspective, because netting is a funny beast in that, unlike a lot of treasury stuff, like if we're managing liquidity systems and stuff like that, you kind of do it in isolation a little bit, just within the treasury team. Whereas netting is really it's a business touch point, right? So all of the subsidiaries around the business are going to see it. That's great in many ways, because it gives treasury a good kind of stage to show off what it's able to do. but it's also a risk, right? Because you need to do it right, because you don't want to get egg on your face across the whole company. So we would generally manage a range of kind of training sessions. Normally we're doing this in global companies, so we try to do kind of them across the time zones over a couple of weeks, which makes people feel comfortable. They know what's going to happen. Generally speaking, if they're coming from an environment where they're not doing netting, what we try to promote is the workload benefit of this, right? You're going to have no more recs. You know what I mean? You're going to have all these things settled out. You're going to deflate your balance sheet, etc., etc. And then effectively we move into the live environment, and we run through the netting process. I mean, we have a very well defined manual, what we refer to as a manual, which lays out kind of all the steps of each netting cycle. But it's a very smooth process once you kind of get up and running, and people generally become very comfortable with it within 1 to 2 cycles. Our clients in general would run a netting cycle every month. That's the sort of general. We've then a good few that run a netting cycle every twice a month, and then we have a handful that do it really frequently, maybe every 5 days. Sometimes that's if they have a really high volume of intercompany trade that is creating FX noise, they want to clear that off the balance sheet as quick as possible. Do you know what I mean? So that would kind of drive some of the frequency. So it is interesting. People use netting for different end purposes. So it's always interesting to see why and to understand why a client wants to do that.
And so because there'll be treasurers listening to this right now. So what effort is it from me as a treasurer? So what do I need to give you, Justin, so that you can set up managers? So list them off for me. If I want to set up netting today, what are the things that you're going to be taking my time to get done so that I can win my time back from?
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. So the key from a pure netting perspective, actually the treasury touch is really light, because there's very little. There's no treasury touch point really. All you really need to do is get the AP and AOR, the intercompany AP and AOR information from wherever. It might be an ERP system, it might be locally input, it might be a local accounting system, whatever. And we generally work with either the centralized IT system or the local finance managers to do that. So that's potentially an effort on the client side, but not necessarily the treasurer, if that makes sense. The treasury elements come into it if we need to do the FX dealing and we need to do the settlement, right? So then, generally speaking, again, we manage most of the setup on the FX trading platform. So generally speaking, all we need is an introduction to the banking partners, and as you can imagine, generally speaking, they already know us, right? So it's not new to them, because as I said, there is that kind of concentration of banks that we generally deal with. So that's reasonably straightforward. And then the other thing is we need to be set up as users on EB systems, and to have all that set up. That's really the bulk of the work, client side work. So it's quite light.
Would I not have to we need to establish treasury policy for the netting system, right? We need to establish what are the controls, what is out of what's our risk appetite on it. I guess with netting, it's not really risk appetite, but there's the whole FX aspect of it, like you mentioned there as well. So generally there would be a lot of aligning on for my company, I need to explain to you my business model. I need to explain to you all my subsidiaries, where they're set up, why they're set up like they are, et cetera, et cetera. We need to go through this whole process as well.
If we're taking on cash management, that's absolutely the case. If you're doing netting in isolation, not so much, because there's not really.
It's just the bank account.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just kind of it's a flow through, right? It should end up netting. By definition, should end up having no impact, right? Or there's something going to be wrong. But you're absolutely right. If we're looking after cash management and stuff like that, we need to agree risk parameters and stuff like that. But actually, to be honest, we normally would work that out in maybe an afternoon's workshop, something like that. We generally go visit our clients. Okay. We bring with us sort of a suggested approach. Do you know what I mean? And then we will adopt
as the treasury experts.
Exactly.
It's just I would ask you to say, what should I do? And
it's not necessarily what should. It's more, look, this is kind of what we would generally do, and really like the key things are, like, for instance, right, some clients would prefer to run a little bit of a higher currency exposure because they don't want to execute more deals, right? Do you know what I mean? Often the differences are really subtle nuances. So we'd have clients that would have, for instance, an FX tolerance of the equivalent of $100,000 US. That's probably about as low as you're going to go, because you're not going to really want to be doing deals for anything lower than that. But then we'd have other ones that would have 5 million. And it's really just understanding. And then obviously, some people would say, well, I'm happy to have a €5 million exposure, but I don't want a 5 million ruble exposure, or whatever, So it's working through those. I know, and as you say, like, you can only work through them, right? Because they will be individual to a company. Someone who has significant operations in Mexico may be willing to have a significant exposure to Mexican peso, even though it could be volatile and the interest rate's very high. So horses for courses. It's a matter of sitting down and working through it, but it's not as complex as you might imagine. And in fact, we seek to not make it that complex. What's the saying? Keep it simple, stupid. It's overcomplication just makes things difficult and potentially sort of increases risk. So we just sort of take that view, and we take a very pragmatic approach, to be honest, to most of these things.
Sounds great.
Amazing. Justin, I think we unfortunately have to bring this absolute masterpiece on Treasury Outsourcing to an end.
Only an Ireland,
Just that. Anything else you'd like to add on the different topics we touched upon? Anything we didn't discuss that you think might be important or interesting to bring to our audience?
I mean, listen, guys, we've covered a lot there, right? And anybody who makes it this far deserves a coffee. No, look, listen, Treasury Outsourcing. The one thing I would say about it is that it kind of flies under the radar a little bit, and it's a consideration that should be higher probably on people's agenda. Only just a consideration, right? When looking for solutions to particular problems, thinking outside of the box can sometimes be a benefit, both kind of financially and from a process perspective. The other thing I'd say is that, like, if anybody is sort of considering looking at any sort of solution, like, right, really the key to it is to find people who've done it before, right? And talk to them. That's the because you can have people from the business itself can kind of tell you anything, right? And outsource providers are very different in nature, so you need to kind of find your fit. Let's put it that way. Someone who can do what you need them to do, and importantly, remember this, that really these people are going to be part of your team, right? So, can you work with them? Would you give them a job if they wanted to be part of your team? They are kind of important considerations. But really, at the end of the day, I would suggest that if people are interested in the topic, there's loads more resources on our website, FTITreasury.com. And in addition to that, if people are seriously kind of interested in discussion, obviously we're always open to help people. Even we talk to people all the time, just from a discussion point of view, and it doesn't ever come to anything. That's totally fine. And again, reach out to your peers that have done this, see what they feel. There's nothing better than a peer sort of recommendation for anything in the Treasury world. I think we probably all know that. If you were looking for a good banking partner, you'd definitely pick up the phone. If you're looking to put in place a new funding structure, you'd definitely pick up the phone. So why not do it for these things as well?
Absolutely amazing. So you named it FTITreasury.com. Anything else if people want to know more about you or FTI Treasury? Yeah,
well, look, as I said, there's lots of resources there on the web. We also have a chatbot there, so feel free. But also my personal email is there, and I'm always open, always interested to hear what's going on. Someone called me a Treasury nerd once, which I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not.
It is, 100%.
We get called that all the time. Yeah. But 170 plus episodes of Corporate Treasury. We're definitely Treasury nerds as well.
I didn't want to say that, guys.
We'll take it.
Thanks, folks. Talk to you all soon.